So probably all of us participants are muted.
Welcome. My name is Nancy Wolanski, and I am the Executive Director of Grantmakers Council of Rhode Island. I am excited for our session this afternoon. Glad to have some GCRI members and some guests joining us today, and very excited about the panel that we have. I do have a poll to start us off. So let me see if I can get it to work.
Let's say other.
Okay. Right, and let's see who we have in the Zoom room. I don't know if you can see that, but it looks like we have philanthropic corporate giving, ESG, C-suite. So glad to have you here. And I am not able to find my second poll, so we're just going to go ahead and dive in. So welcome again. For those of you who don't know, Grantmakers Council of Rhode Island is the statewide philanthropy network, and we have members who are businesses, foundations, giving programs, government grant makers, and we come together to learn how to have more impact in our community. So glad to have you, those of you who are here as guests, glad to have the GCRI members who are here. We have three great panelists to talk today about the intersection of purpose and profit. So we're going to start off by having them introduce themselves, and then we're going to get into some questions. We're going to do this as a conversation so that it can be a little bit more interactive, and would love to have your questions. You can put them in the chat during the panel time, and then we'll have some time for questions as we go. So panelists, we have Adriana Dawson and Ben King and Paula Fernandez representing different aspects of this work. So if you could just introduce yourself, your current role, and any previous work that might influence your perspective on this current discussion. Adriana, do you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Nancy, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm thrilled to be here with all of you. I look forward to a very active chat, lots of questions, and a great conversation with you this afternoon. So again, I'm Adriana Dawson. I'm the Community Engagement Director for Verizon. I oversee the Verizon Foundation for my markets. I oversee all of our social impact programming, which includes volunteer engagement, strategic partnerships. But I've been in the social impact space for 20 plus years. I just didn't know that I was in that space. 20 plus years ago, I was in the people sector, generating impact and connecting my employers to community in a way that hadn't been done before. I stepped into those roles, so happy to be with all of you today to, contextualize and share some of those strategies that I've been able to leverage along my career.
Paula.
Good afternoon. It's so great to see everyone. Paula Fernandez. I'm the Vice President of Community Development for Centerville Bank. We're a mutual community bank headquartered in Rhode Island, in West Warwick, with also locations in Connecticut. I've been with the bank 3.5 years now, and my role is to serve as a liaison between our communities and the bank. I oversee the community affairs work of the bank, primarily directing the charitable foundation work and overseeing all of our community service engagement and outreach efforts. Prior to joining Centerville Bank, I was with United Way of Rhode Island, which is really truly where my experience was shaped. While I was there for 16 years, I served in varying roles, with the last one serving as the Director of Policy and Government Relations, and working with a lot of community organizations and particularly working on housing and homelessness. After 16 wonderful years, I wanted to do something different. I needed to learn and grow a little bit more. And so when the opportunity presented itself to join Centerville Bank, I jumped in and saw it as an opportunity to continue to do the work that I do, investing in communities now through a financial institutions lens, and get to work with many amazing organizations across the state.
And Ben.
Hi, everybody, and thank you, Nancy, for including me in this panel. Look forward to the conversation. I'm with Just Capital. I lead what we call our corporate engagement team, and Just Capital is a nonprofit, mission-driven organization that primarily does research to understand how companies are performing on the issues that we understand from the public. We also do kind of public polling and research to understand what the public views as a just company. What are the issues and things that companies should be focused on to be perceived as a just company, doing right by a range of stakeholders, workers, communities, the environment, and what are all the issues that they should be focused on within each of those broader set of stakeholders. So our research covers the Russell 1000 companies, so the largest 1000 companies based in the US. Our research team collects data on all of those companies to understand where companies are performing on the range of issues that we cover, about 200 different kind of items across, are you disclosing and performing well on environmental measures? Are you doing well on paying a fair and living wage, disclosing diversity, workforce diversity information? So a whole range of information that we then share back publicly to be able to talk about who are the companies that are doing well and try to put out the companies that are leading on those things to try to set the standard for what other companies should be aspiring to do on those topics. Ultimately, our mission is to create an economy that works better for all across those dimensions. What brought me here was kind of two tracks to my career to this point. One was in private sector consulting. I worked at a company called Bain & Company that did management and strategy consulting for a number of years, and then shifted over to lead grant making at an international philanthropic foundation called Atlantic Philanthropies, and kind of got so passionate about the role the private sector can play in addressing the issues that the philanthropic foundation was focused on, that I really wanted to move back over to this intersection, aptly titled, Nancy, of purpose and profit. How do we drive the private sector to address these big social issues?
Thank you. I wanted to give you all a chance, Ben started to talk a little bit about this, but about how your company invests in the community, just so we can get kind of a sense of your investment there. You don't have to go into all the detail, but if you just want to talk briefly about how your companies invest. Adriana, do you want to go first?
Sure. So if you don't mind, Nancy, and in responding to that, what I'm hoping to do is just kind of anchor us in what this conversation is really intended to be, again, and hoping that all of you joining us will get something out of it that you can, apply right now, tomorrow, to your work. And so when we think about corporate citizenship and we think about social impact and purpose, right, in the case for me and for Verizon, it's how Verizon is really leveraging its assets, its privilege, its obligations to support local and global issues that it is committed to, and how we measure the return on that investment is defined really in our case, not just by the financial performance, but it's also measured by the impact that we're seeing in the community, the individuals and the areas that we're lifting and supporting that we deem to be important. But in that work of supporting community and driving this social impact portfolio, it's how we're bringing that back to the business to make sure that those conversations and the themes and the threads that we're seeing in our local communities and that our partners are sharing with us, how that intel, how that market intelligence that we're gathering in the community, and how we're witnessing the intersectionality of all of these areas, how that's coming back to the business to become a business enabler and to become a business driver, where the foundation and the philanthropy space that I sit in isn't only deemed as, as a cost center. It's really not a cost center, because what I'm able to point to is how I'm collaborating across the different business units to share critical information that will help shape strategies in a different way, that will help inform our marketing and communications team, our policy team, our risk management team. So I hope you don't mind, Nancy, but I really just wanted to anchor and center our conversation today and how the purpose in our work and in the social impact space that we're in, whether by strategic investment or community engagement, how our on the ground relationships and partnerships that we're building, how we're leveraging and using that information and that social capital and that power of knowledge and bringing it back and packaging it in a way that helps drive business and extends a different lens to leaders within other business units that perhaps didn't have it and need it.
Thanks. Paula?
Ditto to all of that. Ditto. Absolutely. One of the things that I drive home a lot in the space that I hold is that in all that we do and in the message that I deliver, it's relationships. It's understanding and having the connections and the relationships so we know what is going on, to Adriana's point, gathering that intelligence, bringing that back in. And then, I often say that because I used to live in the nonprofit sector, my change and the shift in my career has been where now I bring the community in to the bank. When I was with United Way of Rhode Island, I would often hear from the grantees that banks were really hard to reach, that banks were really hard to collaborate with, that banks were never at the table. So I always say I am now that community voice inside of our organization, where I'm bringing that intelligence that Adriana talked about. I'm bringing that expertise and knowledge and connection to those community needs, and then challenging a little bit around how can we be responsive? How do we address what we're seeing in the community and invest through our financial resources and talent in addressing those specific community needs? And I'll give you an example of something real tangible that happened and I was really proud of last year. You all know the Rent Relief Program and how that program across the country is helping people in need. And we came across information that in Rhode Island, there was a small subset of individuals who did not have traditional banking relationships. And the challenge was when these payments were coming in and landlords were not registered in the program, folks had a hard time cashing these checks and getting their rents paid. And they needed a community banking partner that would allow folks that didn't have those traditional banking relationships to come in. And so I didn't know what it would take. I didn't know how flexible we could be, but I came back in to the building and said, here's the issue in the community. Here's a real-time opportunity where we can actually step in and support those that need it at this moment so that they can remain housed. We created a community account where individuals who don't have a traditional banking relationship can come in, can cash those checks, and can then work with their landlords to get that paid. We are the only financial institution in the state that actually is doing that. It's not a money-making activity. And I often joke and say, this is not about making money, but this is about a real responsibility to a community need. And it allowed us to also begin to have relationships about what does it mean to bank? If you don't have a banking relationship, what's getting in your way? How do we help you? And how can we work with you? And to this day, those folks that came in and created these accounts are still with us. they're still banking with us. And so we are making those investments where it's just, how can we respond to something that's happening to the community in real time? And I think that's really the beauty of community banking, where you can, in a mutual bank with, local decision making, you have the ability to be flexible and to respond and to make those real tangible investments that impact people's lives and make it real.
Let's continue just on, we're going off script a little bit, but on the idea of kind of gathering that input and intelligence from the community and kind of using that in your business strategies. I want to have Ben talk maybe a little bit about the kind of input that you get for your surveys and how that helps to inform business practice with your companies. And Adriana, you can talk about the ways that you have used your intelligence in kind of helping to inform that kind of strategy development. Ben, I just put you on the spot, so maybe I'll have Adriana go first, and then you can have some time to think about that.
Sure.
Perfect. So thanks. I'll jump right in, and I apologize if I made us deviate from.
No, it's perfect. Perfect. Go.
But, so, and I'm of the belief, I take the position that it's okay to make money, right? If I work for a business and we're in business to make money, it's okay to, drive revenue and make money, but doing it in a way that you're being responsible to society and that you're being accountable to society in the way in which you drive business and you engage in business growth. So I'm okay with helping a corporate entity, build that revenue and that bottom line. But, I guess more specifically, and I can share with this group, the work that I have done on the ground, both from a philanthropy and strategic investment perspective, and building those relationships on the ground and reaching hard to reach communities and identifying all these, sort of critical conversations that are impacting our folks. It's bringing it back in a very strategic way as a business imperative back to the business, right? That can add an additional layer to strategic conversations. For example, going back to the marketing and communications team to offer to them, listen, so as we're building out narratives and developing campaigns, here's what I'm gathering on the ground. This is what folks want to see, or how they want to see themselves represented, how they don't want to see themselves represented. So informing that leadership team in a way that honors community, honors identity, and gives voice to spaces and places where we're in that they're not in, right? So we are a collaborator and a partner in that work. Similarly, with departments within Verizon that are responsible for launching new technology, right? If they don't have a lens or an inclusive lens, because that's not their lived experience, how can I step in as a collaborator with this additional information that I'm gathering on the ground to say, have you tested those products and services and that new technology in communities of color? Have you engaged these BIPOC or LMI areas as betas? So, you're not unintentionally creating barriers or, anything that will impact the business down the road or create any PR mess that you're going to have to clean up. So that's the lens that I bring, is wrapping my arms around people, around community, engaging in my portfolio of work, but really activating in a way that I am, whether they like it or not, I am adding an additional perspective to critical business units and making myself and my portfolio invaluable, right? Where we have to recognize that we cannot operate in a vacuum, and I can't see what I do, as competition to anything else that's going on in the business. I'm not competing with marketing. I'm not competing with business development, but they need me. And so I have just been very bold in raising my voice and raising my hand and saying, you need to link arms with me, because in order for you to be inclusive and effective in how you launch, engage business developers and salespeople, you can't step into these communities thinking that it's business as usual. You know, there's a level of swag and a level of credibility that you need to bring in honoring different spaces, and how you talk about products or services to this community cannot be the same as how you talk about it to this community. So what I attempt to do is make the work that I do invaluable and a business imperative across all business units, so that we work in unison and in tandem to be as inclusive and as impactful as possible.
Great. Ben?
Yeah, well, thank you for those comments, because it's such great context to have you outline how you approach it, because it fits really well with what we try to do at Just, and how we try to just like bring that message to a broader set of companies grounded in research we do both with companies and the American public. And so, like I said, we're a nonprofit focused on how do we shift the economy towards being a more stakeholder driven model. And to your point, it is not meant that means negative impact on shareholders. It means as companies continue to deliver returns for shareholders, how do you do that in a way that's also beneficial for the broader set of stakeholders that companies touch? And how do we recognize that? And so to try to actually do research on that topic, one of the things that we start by doing is going out and engaging the American public in a conversation about what does it mean for a company to be just? What are the things that they should focus on? And so every year we do both a set of focus groups and then follow that up with surveys to identify, when you engage somebody in a conversation about what does it mean for a company to be just, what are the issues that come to your mind, and then have a structured conversation about that. And then we can play that back to companies to help them understand what are all the issues that they should be focused on. And then how do those break down into metrics and performance indicators that they should be transparent about and talk about, especially for the country's largest companies. How do they do that reporting and make sure it's available for investors and for the public? We also then do research about trying to link, not just trying now, showing the link between how positive performance on a lot of those indicators also links to long-term value creation. So it is, really the investment case for investing in your workforce, investing in environmental sustainability, investing in your communities. So just as an example, our focus groups and surveys lead us to have a framework for what does it take to be a just company that covers 5 stakeholder areas: workers, communities, shareholders, customers, and the environment. Each of those stakeholder groups breaks down into a handful of specific issues. So our framework and then our research covers 20 issues. Each of those issues breaks down into a whole bunch of data points that we can go collect. And so just as an example, within workers, the most important issue we hear is the public's expectation that companies should be paying a fair and living wage. Next is creating a diverse and an equitable workplace. Next is a safe work environment. So you can see how you take an issue and then start to break it down into a company should be delivering these things for its workers. And then how do we translate that into some of the things that a company should measure to make sure that they're delivering against those expectations of the public. And like I said, we then try to make sure that that's a national conversation by lifting up the companies that are doing well. For example, we have a partnership with CNBC, who's now using our data to be able to talk to executives that are on their program on some of these metrics. How are you doing? Where are you seeing progress? How does investing in some of these things link to your long-term strategy? So we're trying to make sure that indicators of things like paying a fair and living wage or driving towards a more diverse workplace or a more diverse board, making sure that's part of a conversation when people are talking about a company's performance. So then it just raises the expectation, helps executives that are focused on these things tell the story about why it matters to them and how it's driving progress in their business.
which is great resources. I know there are some folks on the call who are in the corporate philanthropy space, so that you are having those direct one-on-one conversations with community partners and getting that information. But for those who aren't, and who maybe either don't have the staff to be able to do that, or maybe have some distance between you and the community, the things that Just is researching are the things that are important to integrate into your workplace. So in some of that intelligence can come firsthand from the community, and some can come from your research, Ben. So really grateful for the work that Just is doing in that space. Are there other examples that you'd like to give about how your work in the community, or the values that you are espousing publicly around justice, community, philanthropy, are influencing business practice, business products, or strategies? So, Paula, do you want to start first on that?
Sure. I think Ben made a really, something caught my attention in what he said, and, the public's expectations. And, we know that businesses cannot ignore social impact work as part of their business strategies in response to what customers and employees are looking for as you're hiring, as well as you're serving in the community. So that's incredibly important. I think social impact and the work that we do has to go beyond the PR of it, beyond that check presentation photo, but that intentionality around building relationships and supporting the community. So there are opportunities where you can also build differentiated products, explore new markets, attract a diverse talent pool, and engage in that way internally. For me, it's delivering and ensuring that all of my colleagues, all the folks that I work with, are informed and have a strong belief in our community efforts and goals and objectives. If I share with them and engage with them, they are communicating externally to our customers and everybody they're coming across on our philosophies and our values and our priorities. And we have a consistent message that we're delivering in the community in that investment. And I welcome the opportunity to engage with my partners internally, very much like Adriana was discussing, to figure out, how do we actually do this work? Where are the opportunities for us to be flexible? Where can we respond to what's happening and really respond to those expectations that the communities have for us, particularly those that we serve? And as we grow in a very crowded market, what is the differentiator for us, and how do we build our community relationships and initiatives to differentiate ourselves from everybody else and build those relationships over time, so people are motivated to want to partner with us and do business with us.
You're on mute, Nancy. But I'm going to jump in because I wanted to circle behind what Paola said and offer some additional perspective, right? Because this is real talk about, a space that's really exploding, but there are some companies that aren't ready for it, right? They might have one or two people who are leading their philanthropic efforts or engaging in the community on their behalf, and they just kind of see it as that. And unfortunately, at times it could feel performative. It could feel like, we're checking the box, we have someone out there, we hear you, we see you, but at the end of the day, it's not meaningful. They're not measuring impact. They don't really understand the power of people and the power of social impact and what that can mean for their branding, their marketing, how they're amplifying themselves in a space where perhaps they hadn't been in. So looking at that as a market development opportunity, right? We have folks in systemically overlooked communities where we haven't been in. So how could that potentially translate as a business opportunity for us? And unfortunately, and this is where I just wanted to get real for a second, we would hope that companies, and I know that when we talk about companies, we have to be representative of small and large. I just happen to work for one that's got 130,000 employees, and thankfully they get it. But I have worked for employers in the past that didn't. right? And thought that I could just sort of come in and be the end all be all. So I guess what I wanted to say or offer there as a call out to my colleagues here is oftentimes when you're engaged in this work and you're reporting out to your leadership and you're sharing all the wonderful things that you're wrapping your arms around, they're going to hit you over the head with, how are we measuring impact? How will we know that that's driving new business? You know, what is that doing for us as a company? And I think it behooves us in this space to start to think more intentionally and critically about how we are measuring impact, how we're able to translate that work that we're doing and the social impact work back to the business and making the business case, right? So I had to learn how to be a little bit more sophisticated as I started to get more seasoned and more experienced in this space, to be able to build in conversations, build in opportunities to capture metrics, capture the voice of my partners by way of testimonials. So I had to be bullish about how I was telling my story about how I was a business driver for my company, and I had to pull in my partner community as allies and champions in that work because I couldn't do it myself. So I just want to underscore that I recognize that this work isn't always easy, you know, and that sometimes employers may not get it. And we're trying to tell that story over and over again. Yes, I'm doing this for you. Yes, these are the results I'm driving for the business. But we just have to refresh our frame and figure out how to continue to be strategic in how we're telling that story from a business case perspective. It's not just a good thing to do or the right thing to do, but it's a business imperative, and this is why. And this is the impact that we're helping to drive across these lines of business. And this is how, and this is why, right? And this is how I'm going about doing the work that perhaps no one else in the company is equipped to do or has the lived experience to do it. And this is why. So just always being really unapologetic about how you're telling that story and how you're weaving in this function into the DNA of the company and across those business units.
And I add one more thing to Adriana's, and then Ben, I promise we'll be quiet. All of that, and also it takes time. It doesn't happen overnight. Sometimes you have to keep delivering that message. I actually had an executive today say to me that a few years ago, I brought something to the table, and it was kind of like, oh no, why would we ever want to do that? And it didn't happen in that moment, but we kept talking about it. I did different kinds of tactics, from seeing it firsthand, experiences, having conversations, worked on it, and it turned out to be an amazing initiative. And today, this particular person said, you know, initially when you brought this, I didn't see it. And now I'm so glad you kept pushing, you know, to Adriana's point, being bullish, being unapologetically committed to the work when you know it makes sense. And it doesn't happen overnight, but you have to keep delivering the message and bringing the opportunities. And then you see that eventually turn the corner and things start to come together.
And Ben, how do you make that case to the companies that you work with that that it matters and it affects profit and that it has impact, and how do you measure that?
Yeah, well, I'll just first layer on to what I heard in both of those examples and stories is that, you know, the companies that get it, I like that, the companies that get it, you really are seeing invest more in trying to make this connection between what their values are, what the foundation and work of their philanthropic giving is, and how that really connects to business outcomes and business practices. And so, you know, a few examples that come to mind, Prudential or MasterCard or Pepsi, like structurally have put the foundation right alongside or shared ownership with a very senior leader on the executive team. So that way, things like employee or community development, community engagement efforts can just like Paula's example, like if you funnel right into a conversation about how do we create more inclusive products and what does it mean if we have a value around building the community and having strengthening financial inclusion through our products. Those are insights that you need to get through your community engagement work, through your community development work, and funnel right into the core of the business, product planning, product strategy conversation. And so we're seeing companies try to formalize that connection in how they manage and oversee what kinds of objectives do we have. Another kind of obvious example is, building a diverse and equitable workplace. If you think about wanting to drive diversity and inclusion and therefore how do we broaden the funnel we have coming of talent and different perspectives coming into the organization, that links directly to the kinds of things you could and should be doing in terms of community engagement, investment in local education, pipeline and training programs. And so thinking about what are the internal objectives of a company, and then making sure that that links to some of the things that a foundation or community engagement function can and should be doing. And so I just, all of the things Paula said that are happening in her organization, I've seen as significant investments in much larger organizations doing a lot of the same kind of work. To your point about, how do you talk about the business case? Now there's great accumulated research on, investing in human capital, creating more diverse workforce, investing not just to mitigate climate risks, but, to think about an energy transition, all kinds of topics. Making sure that you're addressing those proactively are linked to stronger financial returns. And so like at the macro level, that research is out there. At the micro level, I think, Adriana's point of like really needing to break that down from the macro level of like, yes, we kind of have the research that those things can lead to long-term creation. And that's the conversation we're having kind of like at the large company, long-term multi-year conversation. I know that in the moment that needs to be broken down into what are we trying to do in the next 6 months or a year in this particular part of our organization. But at least that kind of like macro thinking and long-term studies are out there to help try to drive the conversation.
And you found recently that with the last 2 years of racial protest and centering a conversation around race and racial equity, that lots of organizations have put out statements and have said that DEI is important and we may hire a person of color in some visible position, but that doesn't necessarily permeate the organization or infuse those values throughout the entire business. And so you have done some study and toolkit work on this. Do you want to talk at all about that?
Yeah, a lot of what we focus on is trying to match, commitment to real performance and our companies following through on the things they're talking about. And so that drives us to being real advocates of transparency. And transparency on kind of key metrics that you can use to understand if a company's commitments are actually translating into things that they're doing differently or performance that they're starting to improve. So on the topic of racial equity, you're right. We've always covered it in kind of our broad model of what makes a just company and talking about, who's leading on a broad set of metrics. We also distilled a handful of racial equity metrics after the racial reckoning, after so many companies made commitments, saying what are the 15, actually probably 20 metrics that really matter most that we want to return to every year and see if companies are actually following through on improving on these things. And so we are actually just about in 2 or 3 weeks going to release the next iteration of what we call the racial equity tracker. So you can see how are companies doing across these things. Surprisingly, after all those corporate commitments, even of the largest 1,000 companies, only half disclose what their workforce diversity even is, or only about half have full disclosure on what their board racial and gender diversity is. And so, even really simple metrics help you understand if companies are really starting to talk about this publicly. And if they talk about it publicly, that means that they're actually more committed to trying to drive performance internally also. So we're trying to track those kinds of metrics to make sure that companies really are following through with those kinds of commitments.
And Adriana and Paula, do you want to talk about kind of how you're seeing the integration of your philanthropic and community values in the internal practices and workings in company culture, hiring, just internal practices of your companies?
Absolutely. And if you don't mind, I also wanted to share in talking about DEI and sort of that the diversity in the space, according to the latest report issued by the Association of Corporate Citizenship Professionals, 70% of the professionals in this social impact and corporate citizenship space are white, 70%, right? And it's also important that we call out and identify for folks, all of us in this space, what the career pathways look like, you know, in this space. And so to get back to the intersectionality and that intersection of purpose and profit, and those that get it. And a concrete example of that is you have companies like Microsoft who have positions now that are called corporate citizenship and market development, right? Where you've got they're looking for a senior director of the West Coast to oversee corporate citizenship and market development. Again, because companies are starting to get that individuals in this space are much more than external facing brand builders with company money trying to make good things happen, but that practitioners in this space who really understand how to swim across all lanes and who are business activators and have strong business acumen and can help inform different lines of business like we've talked about is a commodity and is a value to business. And so when we're thinking about the career acceleration or the career pathways for professionals like us in this space, you know, there's light at the end of the tunnel because companies are starting to understand that, you know, philanthropy is not this, and that a person with that skill is not this, you know, that they have multiple competencies, multiple skills that can be leveraged in lots of different ways. And so there's a lot of thought partnership happening right now, co-creation of new positions that did not exist before, which is, I think, the beauty of the great reimagination or the reimagining that we're in right now. And so what that means for us at Verizon and for me is I am absolutely leveraging the space that I'm in and the tenor of, you know, of the conversations that are being had in this space and with business to position myself and position this portfolio and the work, you know, across all those different verticals and business units. Like, again, like we've talked about with the sales team, with the marketing and communications team, with the policy team, you know, as they're thinking about, you know, policy and advocacy for different areas that the company stands behind, but they need people on the ground to help inform the policy, you know, that they're going to stand behind. So it's really understanding and unpacking your company that you represent and where you align really, really well with the different business units, and figuring out how you bring them into your work so that they know what you're doing. Sometimes it's just, they don't know what you do, right? And so how are you engaging in those conversations in a way that you're, again, highlighting the work, highlighting the impact that you're bringing in and how they can collaborate and partner with you in that work. It's making the ask sometimes that's the most challenging. You don't have to work by yourself. It doesn't have to be lonely. You know, sometimes the magic happens in the collaboration.
Paula? You're on mute.
Oh my goodness, 2 years in and still haven't. Absolutely. Staying with the DEI point, we're doing the internal work. We're unlike Verizon, we're a small community bank in Rhode Island with branches in Connecticut. So our work's a little smaller in scale, but absolutely, you know, the idea that one person is doing this work, and I don't have to do it alone. Over the last 3 years, we've increased our diversity in our workforce. We've been intentional about that, but it's been around working with our internal pipeline and figuring out who is in our network, internal network, who has the skill sets, the opportunities to grow, to evolve, and to work with us. And so for me, it's been really a wonderful opportunity to work internally with the leaders of the organization, figuring out how do I also build a network internally that has the cultural competencies to impact and to engage in the communities that we serve. And a quick little story I'll share with you. When I arrived at the bank, our diversity numbers were really, really low. They were about 3%. They've grown in 3 years to over 10%. And one particular story that I have is in talking about how do we do this work, and I have to give credit to the leadership of my employer in really being honest about not knowing, not understanding, and wanting to do this right and to do this well, and being unapologetically about that and saying we need support, we need help. And so we're intentionally looking at this work. But we had a woman at one of our branches who had been with the bank for a very long time and had the skill sets, the opportunity, and the potential. And we made an investment and positioned this woman to be coached, to be trained, to be supported over a long period of time. Because if you transition from the branch into a lending role, it's a very different world. And you need the support, you need people to rally around you to build you up. And fast forward 2.5 years, she's one of our top loan originators in our network. And she's bilingual and she's serving the community and she's doing amazing. And since then, we went from not having anybody that had the cultural competency to now having 5 bilingual individuals in one department who, from beginning to end, from loan processing and entry point all the way to the end, has the language and the capacity to support communities of color. And that's just a small area where we slowly begin to move. And now I can tap on the shoulder of any of these colleagues when we need them in the community. They have the expertise, and now they have the capacity and the cultural awareness to go and represent us in a community that sees themselves in our representatives. And that's just one little area, more work to do for sure, but it's incredible that in a very short period of time, it's the way that we do business now. We're not thinking about it, we're not talking about it, it just is, and we're really intentional on that, and those folks are bringing others along. So we're all just holding each other and bringing us together and continuing to grow in the minority community, and figuring out how do we genuinely, through our expertise, help our communities in what they need, and the products and the services, and in the flexibility that we need to ensure that as a financial institution we bring to our communities. Not every product, not every service will fit the mold. So where's our appetite to be a little bit more flexible? And now I have more colleagues out in the community who are bringing that information in as well. And that's sort of what we've been doing on that end.
What you're talking about is that it's a process of developing the infrastructure, the support for employee development and empowerment. If there are people on this call, some of whom are corporate philanthropy already, so they're kind of already standing in that space, and there's some folks who are business folks who may just be starting in this space. How would you advise kind of building that muscle and that infrastructure within their companies to both develop their outward facing as well as their internal capacity for just capitalism, as you're talking about? Where do you start, and kind of what do you need to keep in mind as you're doing that? Adriana, do you want to? Oh, Ben, go first.
I can start at the kind of higher level, and then I can think they can bring in, examples of what they're doing specifically within the organizations, which have been really great additions to kind of my broader perspective working across companies. When we talk to the America's largest companies, the two big drivers are the public's expectations and investor expectations. When there could have been 20 years ago, if you talked about investors' expectations, you would have a very narrow focus on like short-term financial return. That is rapidly changing. And now companies' investment relations teams and the things that they're thinking about, so even it's just as like a very pragmatic, not necessarily values-driven conversation, investor expectations from the largest asset managers, institutional investors, pensions, endowments, they're all starting to ask questions that cover this range of stakeholder issues. And so even if you think as a corporate leader, your focus would be purely shareholder returns and satisfying investors, the investors themselves are starting to broaden their focus and want to engage you in a conversation about diversity, for all the right reasons that we've just heard about, diversity of thinking and diversity of the kinds of people you have in your organization and perspectives add to, long-term business value, how you're addressing environment, how you are investing in your human capital. Those are all things that large asset managers, institutional investors, they're starting to see, and you start to see very clear expectations being laid out by some of these asset managers representing some of the most significant kind of pots of assets. So investor expectations are shifting, at least as a prompt for companies who are slightly behind. And then public expectations. If you look to the kind of coverage we're seeing in the press, and like I mentioned, we have a partnership with CNBC who proactively wants to start being able to have data on this set of stakeholder issues to incorporate, when we talk about company performance, we want to talk about these issues because we know that they're related to long-term performance. And so they're working with us to have some data to prompt a conversation about diversity or equity or human capital and inclusion or community engagement. So I think we're going to start to see, and by the way, our focus groups and our polling, we also can bring to companies to show how the public's interest and understanding and expectation on all these issues continues to increase. And so if a company isn't already doing this proactively, there's a lot of kind of forces on them that are asking a lot of these same questions that are prompting response to start to address and take action.
Great, thanks. Paula, you're unmuted, so you can go first, and then Adriana.
Sure. When I arrived at the bank, we were doing a lot of things, and the bank had been philanthropic and had been an institution that gave very generously for a very long time. And while my role is new, it's the first position that they created, and I serve in this space. I wanted to make sure that we establish a vision. We didn't stop giving in the areas we were giving, but we wanted to organize and structure our giving in a way that made sense. We want people to know what we stand for. We want to know what are the priorities for community investment. And so as I organized those, informing and educating my colleagues at the leadership level, so managing up, managing down, it took a while for people to start talking about capacity building, which is one of our priority areas, because they're like, we don't know what that is. So I had to really change how I talked about that. But as folks are informed, aware, and embracing the vision of who we are, what we stand for, and how we want to support the community, then that makes my work easier because they're sharing in that message externally. We're talking about it internally as well. I think it's important that that happens, and also making sure that when you embark in this work, in order to be really successful in building support for these community investments, you must fully understand what is your social cultural context on how your presence and actions can affect the organizations you serve. So how are folks externally seeing you? Are you aware? Are you just showing up with the check and saying, hey, let's take a photo and post it on social media? Or are you truly taking the time to understand the issues in the context of the need in the communities and positioning as a partner in the work. I think for me, I want to go beyond the check. I want to be a resource. I want to be at the table brainstorming ideas, and to whatever extent possible, I want to be able to influence my employer and taking action and participating. And so really understanding the social issues that are impacting our communities. There's a lot of heavy work, a lot of important work, and it matters that we show up with intention.
Adriana?
Great. I'll jump in, and I actually just wanted to pull on a quick thread that Ben, you offered. So in my case, and again, with Verizon and other companies I've been collaborating with, to your point, that you've got the investor and the shareholder community, but then you also have sort of the public's expectations. But I think what business is also starting to realize, including the the shareholder community, is that consumers and customers are really like, they're activists, right? They're making decisions on where they're spending their dollars and who they're spending their dollars with through more of an activist lens, right? And so to Paola's point now, so how we step into spaces, we as stewards of these companies, how we engage in community, how we honor into the spaces we're stepping into, and as we're leveraging our talent assets within the business to activate as volunteers in the community, are we just activating them as volunteers, or are we creating onboarding and orientation for our staff members to understand what communities they're volunteering in, why they're volunteering, who is the community organization that they're engaging in volunteer work with? So a lot of intentionality behind the strategy, the who and the why, and informing those that we're collaborating with who tend to be more internal as they're stepping into externally facing engagements, making sure that we equip them and share with leaders of those different departments why we're doing it. Because if we're not creating these orientations or onboarding before we're deploying out in volunteer engagements, it can backfire and it could completely sort of kill the initial vibe and intent of what we were looking to do. Again, getting back to customers and consumerism shifting towards a lens of activism. And so making sure that we're inflexing that muscle, sharing that story outwardly of what we're doing when we are engaging with those organizations, both by volunteerism or strategic investments, or being a thought partner and adding additional perspective to a community roundtable. How are we bringing that story back internally to make sure our internal leadership knows where we're plugging them in, how we're plugging them in, but also sharing that story externally so that the community knows that we're active, that we're present, and that we're responsive? Because it's kind of like that whole kind of thing. If the tree falls in the forest, if people don't hear it and if they didn't see it, did it really happen? And that's unfortunate, but we have to become storytellers as we're also engaging in the work to help amplify what we're doing, to hopefully continue to be resourced appropriately within the business, to make sure that we continue the impactful work as we're out in the community.
Great. And we have a few minutes left for questions. Really appreciate all of this input. There's so much to think about, and we could have gone and spent a lot of time on each one of those points. Gina was asking, can you speak to any consideration of geography, in particular rural, which is often overlooked as an area of particular need? So whoever wants to jump in.
Oh, yes, I'll speak to that. And we acquired a bank in Connecticut, and it's very rural. So it is a learning space for me in this moment, because I'm trying to determine, we've identified our vision and our priorities in Rhode Island. It's been affirmed for me that in Connecticut, it's the same thing, but it's very, very rural. And so I'm trying to figure out, what does it look like? And one of the things that I'm hoping to do is, could I figure out a place-based strategy where there's a need, and I can help convene and engage with those who are in that space already to make something happen. So it's a work in progress for me. It's definitely, when you serve the community, you want to serve everybody, right? And the rural areas often get neglected. You know, nobody goes there to fund, and it's kind of hard to get into this work. So I'm hoping, and I'm looking at a strategy where I could help convene, and with the resources that our charitable foundation has, figure out how do we respond to need. And I've already alluded to the leadership here that it may look different from the priorities we've identified, because it's a different space and it's a different environment. So it may be something that we haven't even entertained, but we need to hear from the community, and again, respond to what they're telling us the needs are. And so then it's testing, you know, what's the appetite to actually do something that looks so different. I don't know what it is yet, but I'm hoping to find out.
Anything to add from? I see that Claudia has her hand up.
Yes, thank you. First of all, I just wanted to thank the panelists and Nancy for organizing this convening. So inspirational, amazing hearing each of them. Thank you for the passion that you bring to the work, and for being so generous with sharing your knowledge. I'm very passionate about inclusion. And I'm, working in some initiatives here internally at the bank and through other organizations that I do volunteer work with. And I'm just curious to see what have worked in terms of creating more inclusive climates within your teams, within your organization. Any advice, any insights that you want to share? I would love to hear.
I'll take and I'll be quick, I promise. And good to see you, Claudia. And so for me, it's as I stepped into a new role at Verizon. This was a brand new role, a brand new function within the business. And I had a lot of colleagues who had not engaged in this community work, or perhaps didn't lead their work or their portfolio with an inclusive lens, unintentionally, but that just wasn't top of mind for them. So a strategy that I started to engage in was bringing them with me, and I know I don't mean to simplify it, but I needed to introduce them to these spaces selfishly so that people started to understand the work I was doing in creating ambassadors and championship outside of my business unit, but also sharing with them the sort of the flavor of the different communities that Verizon is in and how we're showing up. And so it's one thing to talk about it and to have folks go through training modules and professional development, and DEI training is critical. I get it, but I needed to make it come alive for them. And I needed to have them step into those spaces with me. Initially as observers, right? And then as they started to get more comfortable and again, understand the historical context and the why, and why is Verizon here? What is Verizon doing? What are you all even talking about? As they started to better understand what was happening and the magic that we were creating, they started to feel more comfortable. They started to become more receptive. They started to ask more questions. So that was my initial approach, and I continue to lead with that.
Okay, thank you.
Same for me, bringing folks with me, engaging in meetings. Sometimes we go out in the community and for them to hear the work, to hear what's going on. But the other piece internally for me is continuing to say, let's be honest, let's be genuine about this work, and it's okay to be where we are, as long as we're making progress and we're making small victories and moving along. We don't want to be embarrassed. Everybody's working on this. It's hard work. It's important work. As long as we're doing it, that's what matters. And so it's okay to say, I don't know. It's okay to say, I'm scared to do and say the wrong thing. I had actually somebody say to me, cancel culture is real, and I'm scared to say or do the wrong thing. And I said, that's real, and that's okay. And it's okay to say that. And let's be honest, and let's have these conversations. And those opportunities are happening. And I think we just need to pause and make the commitment and then do the work. And if it's genuine, it'll happen.
Ben, what have you seen from the companies that you work with in terms of what has worked or what seems to be effective as they are trying to create more inclusive spaces?
Yeah, I was just going to echo and agree with those two examples. I mean, we often say, since we're focused on data and transparency, which gets down to the metrics we can track, we know that inclusion is a really hard component of kind of when people talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We can talk about what are some of the ways we can really track and see if there's progress within an organization and by what kinds of practices they're publicly disclosing. Are they conducting a pay equity analysis? Are they talking about how they're disclosing the diversity of their workforce and setting targets and creating pipelines to try to increase the diversity of the organization? But inclusion is really hard to track. And so the examples that you just heard are the kinds of conversations we end up hearing as the other part of the things that we can't track. And so what we'll try to do sometimes with the companies we work with is just put like chief diversity and inclusion officers together in a closed forum to talk about what are the practices they're putting in place, exactly like we just heard, that they can deploy to create a more inclusive workplace. And that's, business practices, norms, it's employee engagement, it's thinking about the culture. And so we generally are on the kind of what can we track and what metrics are there, but we recognize that that is one that is not necessarily trackable, but is a really important part of the conversation. And so we usually bring people together to just share good practice and talk about what's been working within their organizations.
Thank you.
I would also just suggest kind of the affinity caucuses, like the ability to bring together, a white caucus and affinity caucuses to be able to process some of that, because it addresses some of the, I'm afraid to say something offensive. If they're well facilitated, that can be a space to both for the people of color who are experiencing the degree to which it is or is not inclusive, to be able to vocalize that. And if it's synthesized and then presented back, if there's not the fear of being honest about how they have experienced the current environment, because it's synthesized from the group. And so therefore there's a distance that creates safety. Within the white caucus, there can be some processing of things that they honestly, they care and they don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, but may be afraid to kind of talk through what their misperceptions may be. And so it can create some safe spaces to move forward in that way and communicate that, in the BIPOC caucus, there's value in what they have to say. And there's a need for that to be collected and shared in a way that isn't threatening to the people who are experiencing the positive or negative environment that they are finding themselves in. Any other questions?
Nancy, I think if there's just one thing that personally I would like to share with this group in closing, like just a recommendation, a very humble recommendation for this group based on my experiences. Continue to build your network with other professionals in this space outside of your sector. That's been sort of a game changer for me. And I've leveraged LinkedIn and other resources to connect with other social impact and philanthropy professionals who are outside of the tech sector, right? Just recently, I was telling Nancy, I connected with some in the pharma industry. Who would have known? But it's with the idea that I'm gleaning on other best practices. What are they doing? How are they doing it? What lens are they using? What systems and platforms are they leveraging too on the back end? Because it can get overwhelming sometimes to do the external work and the work back internally. And so gleaning from my colleagues who are leading this work in different sectors has been invaluable. And it also just helps build your network, amplify your voice, and amplify your brand, as a thought partner and a thought leader.
Ben and Paula, closing thoughts?
Edmund.
No, I dropped a couple things in the chat, and hopefully they can be helpful resources in terms of some of the research that we do, how we look at what the range of topics and issues are that make for a just company that can also align with some of the work that can be happening, not just within the company, but also connected to what corporate foundations, corporate philanthropy can be focused on in partnership with the companies. And then we have kind of ongoing insights. So we release the kind of issues, what is the American public really thinking about in terms of what makes a just company? We release that every year. How are companies performing on those? We release every year. And then there's just ongoing news and analysis of like, how do those drive long-term performance? Or what are some trends we're seeing on a topic like worker financial inclusion or racial equity? And so we'll have ongoing news and analysis that goes on our site, or sometimes with other media partners that we work with. And so hopefully just, tracking our site and some of the resources there can be helpful in breaking down these issues and seeing how other companies and other foundations are focused on making progress.
And Just Capital does have a newsletter that you can sign up for on their website. And also, Ben, I don't know if you want to make a plug for the focus groups and survey that the Equity Alliance is doing.
Well, yeah, so we're in partnership with two other kind of leading consulting firms, FSG, which is a mission-driven consulting group, and Policy Link, which focuses on a lot of different kinds of kind of intersection of corporate performance and public policy. And so we are in a racial equity alliance with them. They helped inform the work we do on measuring racial equity metrics that are most important. Last year, we published a CEO blueprint for what executives should be thinking about to address racial equity within their organizations. And then we are currently working with them on articulating specific standards, like how should you measure performance within an organization on the different things that the kind of initial blueprint covered. And so that Corporate Racial Equity Alliance is doing that standard setting work over the course of this year. And what Nancy's talking about is there's a public comment period on the racial equity standards that's currently open. So I can share that back through Nancy after the call.
Thank you. And Pablo?
Yeah, so I never thought that I would be in banking. I was in the nonprofit sector for a long time. And when I was at United Way, every day it was about changing people's lives. Every staff member, and I see Larry on the call, who I work with, because I'm on the board now at United Way, the day-to-day was changing people's lives, investing in the community. And so in this transition into banking, I'm one person doing this work. So there's a disconnect for me. And what I've done over the years is I've stayed connected in the communities by serving on boards. I'll put in a plug for from the Grantmakers of Rhode Island, who has been instrumental in helping me stay in touch, stay connected, informed, and aware of what's happening in the community on the grant making space, as well as with community-based organizations. And that has really allowed me to continue to do my work. I don't have a team. I don't have a whole division of folks working with me on this. So the community partnerships, Adriana mentioned networking with either folks outside the industry, which is absolutely true, as well as for me, it's who's in the community that I can connect with so I can be informed and I can bring those quick and timely opportunities to my role. And so grant makers and other organizations like United Way have the pulse of what's happening in the community, and they are really instrumental for staying in touch and aware.
Thank you all so much for sharing your insights and your experience and expertise. Thank you all for participating today. And I will share the links in a follow-up email so that if you didn't get a chance to get them, I will send them out. So I hope this was helpful and inspiring, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you all.
you, Nancy.